Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into the dark alleys and hushed backrooms of history to uncover the brutal rise of the Mafia and their darkest secrets. Imagine yourself not just reading a thrilling crime novel, but actually walking through the sun-baked, dust-choked villages of 19th century Sicily. You're not just admiring picturesque landscapes, you're feeling the oppressive heat, smelling the pungent scent of citrus groves mixed with the faint tang of fear, and hearing the whispers of a different kind of justice, one enforced by ruthless men. This isn't some romanticized gangster film. This is the real, unvarnished truth of how a clandestine organization emerged from anarchy, carving out its own brutal code and becoming a terrifying force. Seriously, if you were living in Sicily back then, you'd probably understand very quickly that official law meant little, and unofficial law meant everything. And trust me, you'd never cross a certain kind of man without consequences. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the mid-19th century on the island of Sicily, a land of stark contrasts, breathtaking beauty and grinding poverty, ancient traditions and rampant lawlessness. This isn't a place with a strong, centralized government effectively protecting its citizens. For centuries, Sicily has been ruled by a succession of foreign powers: Normans, Spaniards, Bourbons, each leaving their mark but none truly establishing a stable, equitable system of justice or security for the common people. You feel the profound sense of neglect, the widespread resentment towards distant, indifferent rulers who cared little for the daily struggles of the islanders. This vacuum of legitimate authority creates fertile ground for a different kind of power to emerge. You observe the rise of local, informal groups, often operating in the rural areas, particularly in the fertile citrus groves of western Sicily. These groups, initially known as mafiosi, a term whose origins are debated, perhaps meaning swagger or boldness, step into the role of protectors where the state is absent. They offer a form of private justice and security to desperate landowners and peasants who are constantly preyed upon by bandits and corrupt officials. You see them acting as arbiters of disputes, enforcers of contracts, and providers of protection, filling a void left by an ineffective legal system. It's like watching a dark version of a neighborhood watch, where the protectors are also, subtly, the enforcers, and you're always paying them for the privilege. This early form of the Mafia is not yet the highly organized criminal enterprise it would become. Rather, it's a loose collection of powerful individuals, often called men of honor, or uomini d'onore, who command respect and fear through their reputation for violence and their ability to get things done outside the law. They are often landowners themselves, or gabalotti leaseholders who manage vast agricultural estates, employing and controlling large numbers of peasant laborers. You feel the deep-seated mistrust of outsiders, particularly the state, and the reliance on local, familial bonds for survival and protection. The unification of Italy in 1861 further exacerbates the situation in Sicily. The new Italian government, based in the north, is seen by many Sicilians as yet another foreign occupier. You witness the imposition of new taxes, conscription laws, and a legal system that feels alien and distant to the islanders. The unification effort, far from bringing stability, often creates more chaos and resentment in the south. In this environment of continuing anarchy and a weak, unloved state, the Mafia flourishes. They become intermediaries between the state and the people, often acting as local bosses who can deliver votes for politicians in exchange for immunity or favors, thus gaining a political dimension to their power. The brutal truth behind the Mafia's early rise is that it wasn't born purely out of criminality. It emerged as a response to state failure, in a land where official law offered no protection, where justice was a commodity for the rich, and where banditry was rampant. The Mafia provided a crude, yet effective, system of order and security for those who paid for it. They offered protection pizzo from a chaos that they themselves often implicitly controlled or exploited. This protection racket became the foundation of their power, transforming informal influence into structured extortion. It's a chilling feedback loop where they solve the problems they sometimes created. And you're forced to be grateful for it. The concept of omerta, the code of silence, becomes a cornerstone of their power. You'll delve deeper into this later, but even in these early days, you sense its absolute importance. To betray the Mafia, to go to the state, meant certain death. This code, combined with the genuine fear of state corruption and the cultural value placed on self-reliance and distrust of external authority, made it nearly impossible for law enforcement to penetrate their ranks. You feel the pervasive fear that kept people silent, a wall of non-cooperation that protected the burgeoning criminal organization, and intriguing, yet horrifying. Detail about the Mafia's early days is their involvement in the citrus industry. Sicily was a major producer of lemons and oranges, crucial for preventing scurvy on long sea voyages. The mafiosi stepped in to protect these valuable groves and their shipments from bandits, effectively monopolizing the protection racket around this lucrative trade. This blend of legitimate business managing groves and illicit activity extortion for protection demonstrates their pragmatic and often deeply embedded nature within the Sicilian economy. As the 19th century draws to a close, the Mafia in Sicily has evolved from loosely organized men of honor into a more structured, though still localized, criminal enterprise. They control vast areas of the countryside, intimidate local authorities, and exert influence over local politics. Their reach is not yet global, but their methods are refined, their code is established, and their power is rooted in the absence of effective governance. The darkest secret of the Mafia's initial rise is this parasitic relationship with the state. They thrived in chaos and weakness, offering a perverse form of stability that ultimately trapped the very people they claimed to protect. Their system of protection was, in essence, a sophisticated form of extortion, where payment was demanded for safety from threats that either they themselves posed or that they allowed to flourish. This foundation of violence, silence, and exploitation would become the blueprint for their expansion, eventually leaping across the Atlantic to find new, fertile ground in a burgeoning new world. You now step deeper into the secretive world of the Mafia, to the very heart of their power, the unwritten, unbreakable code of silence known as omerta. This isn't just a rule, it's a sacred oath, a terrifying system of self-preservation that enabled the early Mafia to flourish in Sicily, allowing them to operate with chilling impunity. You feel the immense pressure, the suffocating fear that enforced this code, knowing that a single whispered word could mean certain brutal death. This is the darkest secret that allowed their shadow to spread. You recall that the Mafia emerged in Sicily from a vacuum of state authority, offering a perverse form of protection. Omerta became the very foundation of this alternative justice system. It dictates an absolute and unwavering silence regarding all Mafia activities. You observe its core tenets: no cooperation with the state. You never go to the police, the magistrates, or any official authority, regardless of the crime committed against you or your family. Seeking justice from the state is a betrayal of the code and an insult to the men of honor. No revealing Mafia secrets. You never speak about Mafia members, their activities, or their internal workings to outsiders. To do so is to betray the organization itself. Personal responsibility for vengeance. If you or your family are wronged, you seek redress through the Mafia or through personal vendetta, never through the state. You feel the profound cultural impact of this code on the Sicilian populace for generations. Sicilians had learned to distrust the state, which was often seen as corrupt, ineffective, or simply another foreign oppressor. The Mafia exploited this distrust, positioning themselves as the only true source of justice and protection. This created a social environment where omertà wasn't just enforced by fear, but often by a deep-seated cultural skepticism towards official institutions. It's like living in a society where everyone instinctively knows the first rule of Fight Club: you don't talk about Fight Club, especially not to the authorities. The enforcement of omertà was, quite simply, brutal. You witnessed the chilling consequences for anyone who dared to break the code. Betrayal, or scaro, was met with swift, merciless retribution, often involving horrific violence against the offender and sometimes their entire family. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about sending a terrifying message to everyone else. You hear the whispers of bodies found in citrus groves, of disappearances, of accidents that were anything but. The fear of vengeance was so pervasive that even victims of mafia violence would often refuse to identify their attackers to the police, preferring to suffer in silence rather than risk the consequences of breaking the code. This absolute silence creates an impenetrable wall around mafia activities, making it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to investigate or prosecute them. You see the frustration of police and magistrates, constantly facing a wall of non-cooperation. Even from those who were clearly victims, witnesses would claim they saw nothing, or that the crime was committed by unknown persons. This collective silence, enforced by fear and cultural distrust, allowed the Mafia to operate in the shadows, growing in strength and influence, undisturbed by the state, and intriguing yet horrifying. Detail about omertà is that it wasn't just about silence in the face of questioning, it was also about self-sufficiency and self-reliance. The code demanded that you resolve your own disputes, and if you couldn't, you went to the men of honor, not to the state. This reinforced the Mafia's position as the true arbiter of power and justice in the regions they controlled. Further undermining official authority, it meant that for many Sicilians, especially in rural areas, the Mafia was the only functioning legal system they knew. Flawed and brutal as it was, the ritualized nature of omertà further cemented its power. You learn of the initiation ceremonies for becoming a man of honor, often involving a blood oath, a ritual burning of a saint's image, and a pledge of absolute loyalty to the Mafia family. Breaking this oath meant not just physical death, but a profound spiritual damnation in their twisted code. You feel the psychological weight of such a vow, binding individuals to the organization with a terrifying intensity. The darkest secret of omertà is how it transformed mere criminal gangs into a formidable, almost invisible, parallel state, by controlling information and enforcing absolute obedience. The Mafia could extract protection money pizzo from businesses, settle disputes, influence local elections, and engage in illicit activities like smuggling and extortion, all without fear of exposure from within. It allowed them to operate with a degree of impunity that official state institutions could only dream of. The code of silence was their ultimate shield, allowing them to grow wealthy and powerful while leaving behind a trail of fear and suffering. Historians still debate the exact historical evolution of omertà, whether it was a formalized code from the beginning or developed organically out of Sicilian social conditions. But its central role in mafia power is universally acknowledged. The legacy of omertà extends far beyond 19th century Sicily. As the Mafia migrated, first to mainland Italy and then across the Atlantic to America, they carried this brutal code with them. You'll soon see how it became the foundation of their power in new lands. Adapting to new environments, but always maintaining its core principle of absolute silence and brutal retribution for betrayal. This code, more than any specific criminal enterprise, was the true organizational genius of the Mafia, allowing them to thrive in the shadows and resist law enforcement for generations. It ensured that their secrets remained dark, their operations clandestine, and their power seemingly untouchable, preparing them for an even more explosive and brutally public rise in the New World. You now follow the insidious spread of the Mafia across the Atlantic, witnessing their dramatic migration to America and the establishment of new, fertile roots in the bustling, often chaotic, cities of the New World. This isn't just a physical journey, it's a terrifying transformation of a localized Sicilian phenomenon into a transnational criminal enterprise. Adapting its brutal code and dark secrets to a new landscape of opportunity, you feel the immense forces of immigration, poverty, and urban anonymity that provided the perfect cover for their expansion. This is the brutal truth of how a Sicilian secret became an American nightmare. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw a massive wave of Italian, particularly Sicilian, immigration to the United States. You observe millions of poor, desperate peasants and laborers, fleeing poverty, political instability, and a lack of opportunity in their homeland, seeking a better life in America. They settle in burgeoning urban centers like New York, Chicago, Boston, New Orleans, and Philadelphia, forming dense immigrant communities. You feel the profound disorientation and vulnerability of these new arrivals, often facing language barriers, discrimination, and exploitation in a strange land. Within these vulnerable immigrant communities, the Mafia, or rudimentary forms of it, quickly reestablished itself. You see how men of honor, or those aspiring to such a status, filled the same vacuum of authority they had exploited in Sicily. The official American legal system, often staffed by non-Italians who were unfamiliar with Sicilian customs and languages, was frequently seen as distant, discriminatory, or simply ineffective by the new immigrants. Labor disputes, neighborhood squabbles, and protection from street gangs or corrupt bosses often went unaddressed by official channels. This creates a familiar pattern the Mafia steps in to offer a perverse form of protection and justice. You witness them acting as informal arbiters, enforcing contracts often their own, and providing security for businesses and individuals who had nowhere else to turn. They often began by providing services finding jobs for new arrivals, helping resolve conflicts, or even providing loans when traditional banks wouldn't. This initial helpfulness, however, quickly morphed into a system of extortion. They offered protection pizzo from dangers, many of which they themselves created or controlled. You feel the insidious trap accept their help, and you owe them, refuse. And you face the very dangers they claim to protect you from. It's like being offered a warm blanket on a cold night, only to find it slowly tightening around your neck. The code of omertà, which you recall from Sicily, is strictly enforced in these new American environments. You see how this code of silence becomes even more powerful in immigrant communities, where a deep distrust of authority, especially the police, who were often corrupt or prejudiced, was already prevalent. Betrayal to the state meant not just death for the individual, but often ostracization and endangerment for their entire family within the tightly knit community. This wall of silence made it incredibly difficult for American law enforcement to penetrate the burgeoning criminal organizations. Allowing them to grow almost unnoticed by the broader society, the earliest manifestations of organized Italian-American crime are often attributed to the Black Hand, mano nera, a loose network of extortionists rather than a centralized organization. You observe how anonymous threats, often decorated with a black handprint, were sent to Italian immigrants, demanding money. Those who refused often faced violence, bombings or kidnappings, while not the formalized mafia structure. These early brutal acts instilled fear and demonstrated the effectiveness of their methods in the New World. This precursor to the more structured mafia highlights the raw, terrifying power of extortion in vulnerable communities, and intriguing yet horrifying. Detail about this period is the Mafia's involvement in the labor movement. As Italian immigrants flooded into industries like construction, docks, and sanitation, the Mafia often infiltrated labor unions. They would guarantee peaceful labor relations for employers for a price. Of course, or conversely, organize strikes and intimidate workers for their own gain. This infiltration gave them control over jobs, income, and a ready source of manpower for their illicit activities. It blurred the lines between legitimate labor organizing and organized crime, making it incredibly difficult for workers to escape their grasp. As the 20th century dawned, the Mafia began to transition from loose networks of local bosses to more structured families or crews. You see how a few powerful figures, often from the same Sicilian towns, began to exert dominance over specific territories or rackets within American cities. These early bosses built their power through a combination of charisma, brutal violence, and cunning. They established clear hierarchies and rules, turning informal protection rackets into sophisticated criminal enterprises involved in gambling, prostitution, and loan sharking. The brutal truth of the Mafia's migration to America is that it was not merely an importation of existing Sicilian criminal structures. It was an adaptation, a terrifying evolution of a defense mechanism, born from anarchy into a predatory system that thrived on the vulnerabilities of a new immigrant population. The conditions in American cities, overcrowded tenements, lack of social services, discrimination, and the desperation of the poor provided fertile ground for the Mafia to flourish. Preying on their own countrymen while claiming to protect them, this period lays the crucial groundwork for the Mafia's explosion onto the national stage. By the 1920s, they have established strong, deeply entrenched roots in major American cities, developed sophisticated networks, and honed their brutal methods of enforcement. The code of silence, the reliance on violence, and the ability to exploit human needs and vulnerabilities would soon converge with a momentous historical event: Prohibition, unleashing the Mafia's full terrifying potential and transforming them into a nationwide criminal empire. Ready for a brutal, public clash for control, you now step into the roaring, lawless decade of the 1920s in America, a period that would become the golden age of crime for the Mafia. This isn't just a time of flappers and jazz, it's a terrifying explosion of illicit opportunity. Directly fueled by the monumental social experiment of Prohibition, you feel the exhilarating rush of illegal profits, the intoxicating taste of forbidden alcohol, and the chilling savagery of turf wars fought over control of this lucrative new market. This is the brutal truth of how well-intentioned law inadvertently unleashed the full, horrifying power of organized crime onto the American landscape. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution officially goes into effect, prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages throughout the United States. You witness the immediate and profound impact of this law. Millions of Americans, accustomed to drinking alcohol, suddenly find themselves craving a forbidden pleasure. This creates an enormous, untapped market for illicit alcohol. And the Mafia, with its existing networks, its expertise in smuggling, and its willingness to use violence, is perfectly positioned to fill the void. It's like building a dam and accidentally creating a massive roaring river of money for anyone willing to get their hands dirty. You observe the rapid growth of bootlegging, the illegal production and distribution of alcohol. Mafia families quickly establish vast networks of speakeasies, illicit bars, secret distilleries, and smuggling routes. They bring in liquor from Canada, the Caribbean, and even operate their own moonshine operations in rural areas. You feel the immense wealth pouring into their coffers, transforming them from localized criminal gangs into powerful, sophisticated enterprises with national reach. The sheer profits are staggering, far beyond anything they had ever imagined from traditional rackets like gambling or loan sharking. This newfound wealth fuels intense turf wars in major American cities, particularly Chicago and New York. You see rival gangs, both Italian-American and others, battling fiercely for control of lucrative bootlegging territories. These aren't discreet skirmishes, they are often brutal. Public displays of violence involving machine guns, car bombings, and widespread assassinations. The streets of American cities become battlegrounds as rival factions fight for dominance. You feel the pervasive fear that grips neighborhoods caught in the crossfire. The chilling knowledge that anyone could become a casualty in this unseen war. The most notorious figure to emerge from this era is Al Capone in Chicago. You witness his brutal ascent to power, ruthlessly eliminating rivals and consolidating control over Chicago's vast criminal underworld. He uses intimidation, bribery, and open violence to establish a vast bootlegging empire. Controlling hundreds of speakeasies and illicit breweries. His gang, famously involved in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, a horrific execution of 7 rival gang members, showcases the chilling depths of his brutality and his absolute willingness to use overwhelming force to assert dominance. You feel the terror he inspired, the sense that no one was safe from his wrath. It's like watching a real-life gangster movie play out on the streets. But the bullets are real, and the consequences are deadly. In New York, multiple mafia factions, initially operating somewhat independently, also fight for control of the city's vast criminal rackets. Figures like Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, old-school Sicilian bosses, attempt to exert dominance over the burgeoning criminal landscape. You observe their traditional, often brutal, methods clashing with the more modern, business-minded approaches of a new generation of Italian-American gangsters. The brutal truth of Prohibition's golden age of crime is that it didn't eliminate alcohol consumption. It simply transferred a massive, legal industry into the hands of organized crime. This provided the Mafia with unprecedented financial resources, allowing them to corrupt law enforcement and politicians with immense profits. They could bribe police chiefs, judges, and elected officials, buying protection and ensuring their operations went unhindered. You see the chilling extent of this corruption, undermining the very institutions meant to uphold the law, expand their networks. The need for widespread distribution and supply chains forced them to create more sophisticated, national networks, connecting disparate criminal groups and consolidating power. Invest in legitimate businesses. They began to launder their illicit profits by investing in seemingly legitimate businesses, buying restaurants, laundries, and real estate, blurring the lines between legal and illegal enterprises. This allowed them to gain a veneer of respectability while secretly expanding their influence. An intriguing, yet dark, detail about this era is the public's complicity. While the Mafia was brutal, many ordinary citizens, from the working class to the elite, willingly patronized speakeasies and bought illicit alcohol. This widespread demand for forbidden goods created an environment where the Mafia was, in a perverse way, providing a service that a significant portion of the population desired, further entrenching their power and making it difficult for law enforcement to gain public cooperation against them. It's a classic example of unintended consequences, where a moral crusade fueled the very criminality it sought to eliminate. The sheer scale of the violence during Prohibition is a horrifying aspect of this period. The turf wars and gangland killings often spilled into public spaces, terrifying ordinary citizens, the police, often outmatched and outgunned, struggled to contain the bloodshed. This era fundamentally changed the nature of crime in America, introducing a new level of organized violence and systemic corruption. By the end of the 1920s, the Mafia, particularly the Italian-American factions, had transformed into a formidable force. They had amassed vast fortunes, established intricate national networks, and perfected their brutal methods of intimidation and enforcement. The experience of Prohibition provided them with the capital, the organizational structure, and the ruthless personnel that would enable them to survive and thrive for decades to come. Even after alcohol became legal again, the darkest secret of Prohibition's legacy is that it inadvertently created the modern American Mafia. It provided them with the perfect opportunity to grow from localized gangs into a powerful, nationwide criminal empire, deeply embedded in the fabric of American cities. The lessons learned in the ruthless competition of the bootlegging wars would set the stage for even greater power struggles within the Mafia itself. As the victorious factions sought to consolidate their gains and establish a new, chilling order in the American underworld, you now step into one of the bloodiest and most decisive periods in American Mafia history, the Castellamarese War. This wasn't just a conflict between individual gangs, it was a brutal struggle for supremacy, reshaping the very structure of the American Mafia and leading to the birth of the organized crime families we still know today. You feel the terrifying intensity of the violence, the savagery of the internecine warfare, as men who were once loosely connected now turned against each other for ultimate control. This is the brutal truth of how a criminal empire was born from blood and betrayal. The Castellamarese War unfolded primarily in New York City from 1930 to 1931. You observe the landscape of the Italian-American underworld in the late 1920s. Prohibition, as you recall, had injected immense illicit wealth into the gangs, allowing them to expand and proliferate. However, with this newfound wealth came escalating tensions and ambitions. Two main factions had emerged: the Old Guard, or Mustache Pete's faction, led by Joe Masseria, a traditional Sicilian boss. These were the first generation of Mafia members who had immigrated from Sicily, strictly adhering to the old-world Sicilian Mafia rules and traditions. They were often reluctant to work with non-Italians and resistant to new business methods. You see them as older, grizzled men, speaking with heavy Italian accents, and insisting on adherence to the old ways. The Young Turks, or Young Gunmen faction, led by Salvatore Maranzano, a newer Sicilian boss who hailed from the town of Castellammare del Golfo. Sicily, hence the war's name. Maranzano was more visionary, keen to modernize the Mafia, organize it into a tighter structure, and expand beyond purely Italian communities. His faction included ambitious younger mobsters like Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Vito Genovese, Joe Adonis, and Meyer Lansky. Though Lansky was Jewish, he was a close ally of Luciano. You sense the energy of this new generation, fed up with old-school leadership and eager to seize control. You feel the clash between these two differing visions for the Mafia. Masseria wanted to maintain the old structure, where each boss was king in his own territory, taxing smaller gangs. Maranzano, conversely, wanted a unified, clearly hierarchical Mafia, where he would be the capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses and oversee all criminal operations in America. The conflict was inevitable. The Castellamarese War erupts, and you witness the bloody events that unfold. It's a series of assassinations, car bombings, and public shootouts that rocked the streets of New York. Members of each faction were hunted down and killed. You hear the chatter of machine guns echoing through neighborhoods. See bodies left on the streets, a testament to the savagery of the struggle for ultimate control. Bosses on both sides were deeply distrustful of each other, and anyone suspected of disloyalty was ruthlessly eliminated. And intriguing, yet chilling. Detail about this war is that Lucky Luciano was initially part of Masseria's faction. However, Luciano was a young Turk in his thinking, believing the old ways were obsolete. He resented Masseria's conservatism and shared Maranzano's vision for a modernized Mafia. You see Luciano, a shrewd opportunist, quietly beginning to plot against his own boss. This was a brutal betrayal of old loyalties for a new, more profitable future. The war's climax arrives in April 1931. You witness the event many consider the pivotal turning point. Lucky Luciano arranges a meeting with Joe Masseria at a Coney Island restaurant during their meal. Luciano excuses himself to go to the restroom while he is absent. 4 hitmen, reportedly including Bugsy Siegel and Albert Anastasia, storm the restaurant and gun down Masseria. This public assassination, orchestrated by one of Masseria's own men, was a stunning betrayal, demonstrating that even the most powerful bosses could be overthrown from within. With Masseria dead, Maranzano declares victory and proclaims himself capo di tutti capi. You see Maranzano immediately attempting to reorganize the New York underworld. He divides the major gangs into 5 distinct families, each with specific territories and operations. With him as the supreme overlord, he lays down new rules, hierarchies, and even a written constitution for the underworld. Maranzano's goal was to create a more centralized, tightly controlled structure. However, Maranzano also made a fatal mistake. He became too complacent and began to treat the young Turks like Luciano with disdain, viewing them as mere subordinates. He even drew up a hit list of those he intended to eliminate. And Luciano's name was on it? You feel the escalating tension as Luciano realizes that Maranzano, despite his vision, was as dictatorial and dangerous as Masseria. Luciano didn't want a boss of all bosses. He wanted a governing commission, a more collaborative criminal business model. In September 1931, just months after Masseria's killing, you witness another shocking betrayal. Lucky Luciano orchestrates Maranzano's murder. 4 hitmen, some disguised as police officers, storm Maranzano's Manhattan office and stab him to death. This assassination, just months after Maranzano attained supreme power, was a clear signal that the younger bosses would not tolerate any dictatorial attempts. The brutal truth behind the Castellamarese War is that it was more than just a struggle for control over bootlegging rackets. It was a generational and ideological battle over the very nature of the Mafia itself. The old guard was decimated, making way for a new generation of young Turks who believed in a more modernized, decentralized, and business-oriented form of organized crime. This war definitively established the family and commission system that would dominate Italian-American organized crime for decades to come. The Castellamarese War, with its betrayals, violence, and brutal deaths, laid the groundwork for the modern American mafia structure. It purged the old guard and cleared the path for the young. Ambitious figures who organized the underworld in a way that would allow it to thrive even after Prohibition ended. The scars of this war, the lessons in ruthlessness and the necessity of at least nominal unity, would shape the Mafia for years to come, and the darkest secrets of this internecine conflict would continue to haunt them. You now witness the chilling aftermath of the Castellamarese War, as the brutal conflict gives rise to a new, terrifyingly organized structure, the 5 families of New York and their far-reaching, often silent, national influence. This isn't just about controlling rackets in one city. It's about establishing a sophisticated, hierarchical criminal enterprise that would dominate the American underworld for decades. Wielding power through a combination of ruthless efficiency and calculated diplomacy, you feel the shift from chaotic street wars to a more ordered, albeit still brutally enforced, system of criminal governance. This is the darkest secret of how the American Mafia achieved its zenith, having eliminated the boss of all bosses, Salvatore Maranzano. Lucky Luciano emerges as the true architect of the modern American Mafia. You recall his vision: no single supreme boss, but a collaborative commission that would arbitrate disputes and govern inter-family relations. In 1931, Luciano convenes a meeting of the most powerful Italian-American crime leaders from across the country. You observe this historic gathering, often romanticized in popular culture, where the future of organized crime in America is quietly decided. From this meeting, the 5 families of New York City are formally established. These are not merely gangs, they are highly structured, hierarchical organizations, each with its own defined territory, rackets, and chain of command. You see them solidify into the Gambino family, the Genovese family, the Lucchese family, the Colombo family, the Bonanno family. Each family is headed by a boss who holds absolute authority within his domain. Beneath him are the underboss, second in command, the consigliere advisor, capo regime's captains, and finally, the soldiers-made members. You feel the rigid discipline, the almost military-like structure that makes these families incredibly efficient at organizing crime, resolving internal disputes, and maintaining secrecy. This sophisticated organization is one of the brutal truths of the Mafia's enduring power. They learn to run crime like a business. It's like watching a dark version of a corporate reorganization, where the new executives are ruthless killers, and the board meetings are held in dimly lit back rooms. Crucially, Luciano also establishes the Commission, often referred to as the Mafia's Board of Directors. This body, composed of the bosses of the 5 families and other influential crime leaders from outside New York, like Al Capone's successor in Chicago, serves as a governing council. Its primary functions are to arbitrate disputes between families, preventing destructive turf wars like the Castellammarise War, regulate and authorize major criminal enterprises that span multiple territories, enforce the rules of the Mafia, particularly omertà, and hand down sentences for major transgressions. Approve new made members initiates. You feel the immense significance of the Commission. It brings a new level of stability and order to the American underworld, allowing the Mafia to operate more efficiently and less conspicuously, instead of endless bloodshed. Disputes are now often settled through negotiation, backed by the implicit threat of the Commission's combined power. This move towards collective governance, born from the chaos of the Castellammarise War, proves to be a stroke of genius, solidifying the Mafia's national reach. With Prohibition ending in 1933, the Mafia quickly adapts. You observe them pivoting from bootlegging to a diverse array of illicit activities. Gambling. They control vast illegal gambling operations, including numbers rackets, illicit casinos, and bookmaking. Loan sharking. They provide high-interest loans to desperate individuals and businesses, collecting debts through intimidation and violence, extortion and protection rackets. They continue their traditional pizzo operations, demanding payment from businesses for protection against various threats, often their own. Labor racketeering. They infiltrate legitimate labor unions, controlling jobs, extorting businesses, and siphoning off union funds. This gave them immense power over entire industries, from construction to garment manufacturing. You feel the chilling grip they exert over honest workers and businesses, who are forced to comply out of fear. The Mafia also expands its influence far beyond New York. You see satellite organizations, often led by figures with ties to the New York families, establishing strong footholds in cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. These regional syndicates, while maintaining some autonomy, often adhere to the Commission's authority, creating a truly national network of organized crime. The darkest secret of this period is the Mafia's increasing ability to operate with a veneer of legitimacy. They invest their vast illicit profits into legitimate businesses, restaurants, trucking companies, laundries, real estate, using these fronts to launder money and provide cover for their illegal activities. This blurring of lines between the underworld and the legitimate world makes them incredibly difficult for law enforcement to identify and dismantle. You see seemingly respectable businessmen who are, in reality, ruthless mobsters operating in plain sight, and intriguing, yet horrifying. Detail from this era is the Mafia's unexpected role during World War II, concerned about potential sabotage of New York's docks by Axis powers. U.S. naval intelligence reportedly made a deal with Lucky Luciano, then imprisoned. In exchange for a commuted sentence and eventual deportation, Luciano allegedly used his influence to ensure labor peace on the docks and gather intelligence from the underworld. This controversial, behind-the-scenes cooperation between the U.S. government and a notorious mob boss highlights the complex and morally ambiguous realities of wartime expediency. Historians still debate the true extent and effectiveness of Luciano's wartime cooperation. with some arguing it was exaggerated. While others maintain it was crucial for national security, the power of the five families and the commission was rooted in two key elements. Omerta, the absolute code of silence, strictly enforced by the threat of death, continued to be their most formidable shield against law enforcement. Violence and intimidation, while now more controlled and strategic than during the Castellammarise War, the implicit and explicit threat of brutal violence remained the ultimate guarantor of their power. By the mid-20th century, the American Mafia, particularly the five families of New York, had reached its peak. They were a powerful, wealthy, and deeply entrenched force in American society, controlling vast criminal enterprises and exerting influence over legitimate industries and even politics. The brutal power struggles of the past had given way to a sophisticated, organized criminal empire that seemed almost untouchable, however. This very power and visibility would eventually draw the attention of a new, relentless force, the federal government, setting the stage for decades of intense crackdowns and a slow, agonizing decline. You now journey to the glittering, neon-lit desert oasis of Las Vegas and witness one of the most audacious and darkest secrets of the American Mafia. They're silent, almost invisible. Control over the city's glittering casinos and their illicit profits. This isn't just about running illegal gambling dens and back alleys. It's about a sophisticated, large-scale infiltration of a legitimate, booming industry where immense wealth was siphoned off and laundered with chilling efficiency. You feel the intoxicating allure of easy money, the pervasive corruption, and the chilling truth that even beneath the brightest lights, the darkest shadows of organized crime could flourish. This is the brutal truth of the Mafia's audacious dream. The story of the Mafia in Las Vegas begins in the mid-20th century, long before the corporate giants and publicly traded companies dominated the Strip. After World War II, Las Vegas was a small desert town with a burgeoning legal gambling industry, but it lacked the capital and expertise to build the grand, luxurious resorts that would attract tourists from across the nation. The Mafia, with its vast illicit wealth accumulated during Prohibition and its experience in running illegal gambling operations, saw an unparalleled opportunity. It was like finding an untapped gold mine in the middle of a desert, waiting for someone with the right tools and ruthless ambition to exploit it. You observe pioneering figures like Bugsy Siegel, a notorious gangster from New York, an associate of Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, who arrived in Las Vegas in the late 1940s. He envisioned a glamorous, high-end casino resort, far beyond the dusty saloons and small-time gambling halls that existed. He famously began construction of the Flamingo Hotel and Casino, pouring massive amounts of mob money into its development. You feel the audacity of his vision, but also the chaotic, often mismanaged, reality of its construction, which famously went over budget, infuriating his mafia backers. This cost overrun ultimately sealed Siegel's fate. He was executed in 1947, a brutal reminder that even visionaries could not escape the Mafia's unforgiving code for financial mismanagement. Following Siegel's demise, other, more discreet, Mafia families moved in, learning from his mistakes. You witness the systematic infiltration of Las Vegas casinos by various Mafia families, particularly those from Chicago, Cleveland, Kansas City, and, of course, the five families of New York. They understood that direct, overt ownership was too risky. Instead, they preferred silent partnerships and hidden control, often leveraging their power over labor unions like the Teamsters. Controlled by figures like Jimmy Hoffa, who had deep ties to the Mafia to secure loans from union pension funds. These funds, ostensibly legitimate, were often funneled through corrupt lawyers and intermediaries to build and expand casinos, effectively using union workers' retirement money to finance Mafia operations. You feel the chilling brilliance of this scheme. Using legitimate money to build illegitimate empires, The darkest secret of the Mafia's control in Las Vegas was the system of the skim. You observe how vast amounts of cash, generated by the casino's gambling operations, were siphoned off before they were officially counted and reported. This skimmed money, untaxed and untraceable, was then funneled directly back to the Mafia bosses in their home cities. This wasn't just small-time theft. It was a highly organized, intricate system of embezzlement that involved corrupt casino managers, accountants, and bagmen, all under the watchful eye of the Mafia. Millions. Eventually hundreds of millions. Of dollars were skimmed from the Strip's glittering profits, becoming the lifeblood of organized crime back east. It's like watching a secret pipeline silently diverting a river of gold, right under the noses of law enforcement. The Mafia's presence in Las Vegas was enforced by the usual methods of intimidation and violence. Though often more subtly than in the street wars of the East, you see enforcers ensuring loyalty and dealing with anyone who threatened the skim or the casino's operations. Disputes were handled discreetly, often in the desert outside town, leaving little trace. The code of omerta was just as vital here, ensuring that no one talked about the true ownership or the skim. An intriguing, yet horrifying detail about the Mafia's Las Vegas operations was their surprising reliance on individuals who were not made members, but rather trusted associates. Figures like Frank Rosenthal, known as Lefty, ran major casinos for the Chicago outfit. Despite not being a full-fledged mobster, these individuals, often brilliant gamblers or casino managers, were indispensable for their expertise. But they operated under constant threat, knowing that their lives depended on the goodwill of their mob bosses. The movie Casino vividly portrays this complex and dangerous relationship. The Mafia's control over Las Vegas extended beyond the skim. You observe their influence in entertainment. They controlled bookings for major entertainers, ensuring that their favored acts performed in their casinos, often taking a cut of their earnings. Supplies. They controlled the supply chains for various casino necessities, from linens to food and beverages, funneling business to mob-owned companies, labor unions. Their tight grip on unions allowed them to control who worked in the casinos and to extort businesses that relied on union labor. This period, from the 1950s through the 1970s, represents the peak of the Mafia's overt influence in a legitimate American city. Las Vegas became their financial playground, a place where the lines between legal and illegal blurred completely. The sheer volume of untraceable cash allowed them to expand their operations globally, invest in even more legitimate businesses, and further corrupt politicians and officials. However, the very success of the skim and their overt presence in Las Vegas would eventually contribute to their downfall. The vast sums of money involved eventually drew the relentless attention of the FBI and other federal agencies. You'll soon witness how the new investigative tools and a renewed focus on organized crime would begin to chip away at the Mafia's control, exposing their darkest secrets and leading to a brutal struggle for survival against the might of the U.S. government. The brutal truth of the Mafia's Las Vegas dream is that it was built on a foundation of systemic fraud, intimidation, and silent control. It showcased their adaptability and their ability to exploit new opportunities, turning a desert town into a global entertainment capital while secretly siphoning off billions. But this very visibility and financial success ultimately exposed them to a level of scrutiny and a coordinated crackdown that they had never faced before. Initiating their long, agonizing decline, you now witness a significant turning point in the history of the American Mafia, the relentless and increasingly effective government crackdowns that began to chip away at their seemingly impenetrable power, exposing their vulnerabilities and initiating a slow, agonizing decline. This isn't just about individual arrests, it's about a systematic, coordinated effort by law enforcement to dismantle organized crime, often leveraging new legal tools and unprecedented investigative techniques. You feel the immense pressure building on the underworld, the chilling realization that their traditional shields of secrecy and intimidation are beginning to crumble. This is the brutal truth of how even the most powerful criminal empires can be brought to their knees by the relentless might of the state. For decades, the Mafia operated with a significant degree of impunity, protected by omerta, widespread corruption, and the sheer difficulty of gathering evidence against a secretive, hierarchical organization. You recall how they thrived during Prohibition, amassing wealth and establishing a national network that seemed untouchable. However, by the mid-20th century, a growing public awareness of organized crime, fueled by sensational newspaper reports and televised Senate hearings, began to put immense pressure on the federal government to act. A pivotal moment comes with the Kefauver Committee hearings in the early 1950s. You observe these televised hearings, which brought the reality of organized crime into millions of American homes. Witnesses, some reluctant, some defiant, testified about mafia operations, gambling rackets, and political corruption, while often lacking direct convictions. These hearings generated immense public outrage and forced the federal government to confront the scale of the problem. It was like pulling back the curtain on a secret society, exposing its inner workings to a horrified public. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, under the long-serving director J. Edgar Hoover, initially downplayed the existence of a national crime syndicate, often focusing on more visible threats like communist subversion. However, mounting evidence and public pressure eventually forced a change in strategy. You witnessed the FBI's growing focus on organized crime, though their methods would later be criticized for their slowness and lack of initial understanding of the Mafia's structure. A truly groundbreaking shift occurs with the Appalachian meeting in 1957. You see nearly 100 top Mafia bosses from across the United States secretly gathering at a rural estate in Appalachian, New York, for a major summit. However, local law enforcement, acting on a tip-off, raids the meeting. While most mobsters escape, many are arrested and their identities are exposed. This event, initially dismissed by some as a mere social gathering, provides the FBI with irrefutable proof of a national mafia commission and the interconnectedness of crime families across the country. It shatters the myth that the Mafia was merely a collection of disparate local gangs and forces the FBI to acknowledge the existence of a highly organized national criminal syndicate. This accidental raid became a goldmine of intelligence, a darkest secret exposed by pure chance. The Appalachian revelation fundamentally changes the government's approach. You observe the development of new, more sophisticated legal and investigative tools specifically designed to combat organized crime. Wiretaps and electronic surveillance law enforcement increasingly utilizes wiretaps to gather evidence, listening in on conversations and unraveling complex criminal plots. This technology, once controversial, becomes a crucial weapon against secretive organizations, informants and defectors. The FBI begins to cultivate high-level informants from within the Mafia, offering plea deals and witness protection in exchange for testimony against their former associates. This is a terrifying breach of omerta, the code of silence. You feel the profound psychological impact of this strategy. As trust within the Mafia begins to erode, and the fear of betrayal from within replaces the fear of external law enforcement. It's like watching a seemingly impenetrable wall develop cracks. As its own bricks start falling out, the witness protection program established in the early 1970s. This program provides new identities and relocation for mobsters and their families who agree to testify. Offering a lifeline to those willing to break omerta, the RICO Act Racketeer, Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act of 1970. This landmark legislation fundamentally changes how organized crime is prosecuted. It allows prosecutors to target entire criminal enterprises, not just individual acts, and to prosecute leaders for crimes they ordered but didn't directly commit. It also allows for the forfeiture of assets acquired through racketeering. You feel the immense power of this law. Giving the government a blunt instrument to dismantle entire mafia families from the top down, the 1980s see a particularly aggressive wave of federal prosecutions, often targeting the leadership of the New York Five families and other major syndicates. You witness the dramatic trials, with mob bosses, once untouchable figures, being brought to justice and sentenced to long prison terms. The arrests and convictions of figures like Paul Castellano Gambino Boss, John Gotti, who murdered Castellano and became Gambino Boss, and the leaders of the Lucchesi, Genovese, and Colombo families mark a significant turning point. This relentless pressure cripples the traditional leadership structure of the Mafia, creating a vacuum at the top that no new generation can truly fill. It's like watching the heads of a multi-headed hydra being systematically lopped off, with fewer and fewer growing back, and intriguing, yet horrifying. Detail of this period is the Pizza Connection case of the 1980s. This massive investigation exposed a vast drug trafficking ring, controlled by Sicilian mafia members and their American counterparts, who used pizza parlors as fronts to distribute heroin across the United States. This case highlighted the international links of organized crime and the sophistication of their money laundering operations. But it also provided unprecedented insights into their inner workings for law enforcement. It was a complex, sprawling criminal enterprise, but ultimately it revealed too much. The brutal truth of these government crackdowns is that they expose the Mafia's inherent internal weaknesses. The reliance on omertà crumbled under the pressure of plea bargains and witness protection. The brutal code of loyalty, once sacrosanct, was increasingly betrayed by ambitious or desperate members. The generational gap widened as younger members became less committed to the old-school traditions and more interested in immediate profit, sometimes leading to recklessness. The sheer volume of evidence gathered through wiretaps and informants painted an undeniable picture of their operations, making it impossible for them to deny their existence or their crimes. By the end of the 20th century, the traditional American Mafia, while not entirely extinct, was severely crippled. Its power, wealth, and influence had dramatically diminished. The glory days of Prohibition in Las Vegas were long gone, replaced by a constant struggle for survival against relentless law enforcement. The brutal rise of the Mafia, rooted in a vacuum of authority and the code of silence, was met by a determined state wielding new legal tools, ultimately leading to its agonizing decline. The era of the seemingly untouchable Godfather was over. Replaced by the chilling reality of prison cells and broken oaths, you now delve into one of the most chilling and dramatic episodes in the fight against the Mafia, the story of Donnie Brasco. This isn't a broad historical overview, it's an intensely personal, high-stakes tale of undercover betrayal, where a single FBI agent risked everything to infiltrate one of New York's most powerful crime families, bringing down powerful Mafia figures from within. You feel the constant tension, the suffocating paranoia, and the horrifying realization that a single mistake could cost not just a life, but an entire investigation. This is the darkest secret of the Mafia exposed. Not by wiretaps, but by a man living a double life. The year is 1975, the American Mafia. Though facing increasing pressure from law enforcement, is still a formidable force. The five families of New York continue to control vast criminal enterprises, and their code of omertà remains largely unbroken. You recall how vital this code of silence was to their power, preventing outsiders from ever truly understanding or dismantling their hierarchical structure. This is the environment that Joseph D. Pistone, a young, determined FBI agent, is about to enter. You observe Pistone as he meticulously crafts his undercover persona, Donnie Brasco, a seemingly unassuming jewel thief and expert gemologist. This isn't a quick assignment, it's a deep, long-term infiltration. Pistone spends years cultivating his new identity, learning the slang, the mannerisms, The unspoken rules of the underworld. He immerses himself completely, cutting off almost all contact with his own family and his true identity, living a life of constant deception and immense psychological strain. You feel the profound isolation of his existence, knowing that he can trust no one, and that his life hangs by a thread. It's like watching an actor preparing for the role of a lifetime. But if he breaks character, he dies. Brasco's entry into the Mafia underworld is gradual and deliberate. He first befriends a small-time mob associate, Benjamin Lefty Two Guns Ruggiero, an aging hitman and soldier in the Bonanno crime family. You see Lefty, a weary veteran of the streets, taking a liking to the seemingly legitimate, but cunning, jewel thief. Lefty introduces Brasco to the inner workings of the Bonanno family, vouching for him and unknowingly bringing an FBI agent directly into the heart of his organization. You feel the slow, insidious process of trust being built, a trust that is a fundamental betrayal from its very inception, over the next 6 years. From 1976 to 1981, you witnessed Donnie Brasco's incredible journey deep inside the Bonanno and later the Colombo crime families. He is no longer just observing. He is actively participating in criminal activities. Gaining the trust of top mobsters, including Bonanno Capo Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano, he lives the life involved in robberies, extortion, illegal gambling, and even violent acts, all while meticulously gathering evidence for the FBI. He witnesses murders, discusses criminal plots, and learns the intricate details of the Mafia's operations, its finances, and its brutal code. You feel the constant pressure of his double life, the terrifying need to maintain his facade, knowing that one wrong word, one moment of hesitation, could expose him and lead to his brutal death. The darkest secret exposed by Donnie Brasco is the absolute, pervasive paranoia within the Mafia itself. Despite omertà, the bosses lived in constant fear of informants and rivals. Brasco's success proved that even their most trusted men of honor could be a government agent, shattering the illusion of impenetrable secrecy. He witnessed firsthand the petty jealousies, the brutal internal politics, and the casual cruelty that underpinned their seemingly impenetrable power. It's like discovering that the inner sanctum of a feared cult is actually filled with bickering, backstabbing, and a constant fear of exposure, and intriguing yet chilling. Detail from the Donnie Brasco operation is the profound psychological toll it took on Agent Pistone himself. Living a fabricated identity for so long, constantly under threat, blurred the lines between his real self and his undercover persona. He suffered from severe emotional and psychological strain, a testament to the immense personal sacrifice involved in such an operation. His family lived under constant threat, and his normal life effectively ceased to exist for years. Historians and psychologists still debate the long-term psychological impact of deep undercover work on law enforcement agents. And Pistone's case is often cited as a prime example of the extreme personal cost. The information gathered by Donnie Brasco proves invaluable to the FBI. He provides unprecedented insights into the Mafia's internal structure, its leadership, its rules, and its methods. This intelligence allows the FBI to move beyond individual arrests and launch a coordinated assault on the entire criminal enterprise. The operation culminates in 1981 when the FBI abruptly pulls Pistone out of the undercover assignment. Fearing that his cover is about to be blown, the revelation that Donnie Brasco was an FBI agent sends shockwaves through the American underworld. You witness the immediate consequences: mobster retribution. The Bonanno family is plunged into chaos. Sonny Black Napolitano and Lefty Ruggiero, who vouched for Brasco, are marked for death. Both are brutally murdered by their own family. A chilling testament to the Mafia's unforgiving code of loyalty and punishment for perceived betrayal, even if they were unaware of Brasco's true identity. You feel the terror these men must have experienced. knowing their fate was sealed simply for associating with an informant. Massive indictments based on Pistone's testimony and the evidence he gathered. Over 200 Mafia members are indicted and convicted in the following years, including many high-ranking capos and soldiers from the Bonanno and Colombo families. Erosion of trust. The Brasco operation deeply shakes the Mafia's internal trust. The fear that anyone could be an informant leads to increased paranoia, making it harder for mobsters to conduct business and trust each other, fundamentally undermining their organizational cohesion. The brutal truth of the Donnie Brasco operation and its horrifying impact on the Mafia is that it exposed their vulnerability from within. It proved that omertà, while formidable, was not unbreakable, and that the relentless pressure of law enforcement could force cracks in their code of silence. It was a strategic victory for the government, disrupting the Mafia's operations and leading to significant convictions. The legacy of Donnie Brasco is complex. For law enforcement, it's a triumph of deep undercover work, a testament to the courage and dedication of agents willing to risk everything. For the Mafia, it's a story of devastating betrayal, a chilling lesson that even their inner circle was no longer safe. The operation fundamentally contributed to the decline of the traditional American Mafia in the late 20th century, helping to dismantle the structures that Lucky Luciano had so carefully built. The golden age of the Mafia was fading, brought down not by rival gangs, but by the relentless, patient work of a single, brave man who dared to live among them and betray their darkest secrets. You now arrive at the final reflection on the American Mafia, contemplating its legacy of violence and its struggle for survival in the modern world. What began as a desperate response to anarchy in Sicily and exploded into a formidable criminal empire during Prohibition, eventually faced the relentless might of the state, slowly but inexorably chipping away at its power. You feel the echoes of their brutal history, recognizing their undeniable impact on popular culture. Even as their real-world influence has dramatically waned, this is the brutal truth of how even the most powerful criminal organizations can be brought to heel. The mid to late 20th century marked the peak of the American Mafia's power and influence, particularly in cities like New York, Chicago, and Las Vegas. You recall their sophisticated organizational structure, the Five Families, their National Commission, and their vast criminal enterprises spanning gambling, loan sharking, labor racketeering, and drug trafficking. Their code of omertà and their pervasive use of violence made them seem almost untouchable. However, the relentless government crackdowns, which you just witnessed through the lens of the Donnie Brasco operation, profoundly crippled the traditional mafia. The introduction of new legal tools like the RICO Act, the widespread use of wiretaps, and the increasing success of cultivating informants and defectors, enabled by witness protection programs, systematically dismantled their leadership. You saw powerful mob bosses, once untouchable figures, being indicted, convicted, and sent to prison for life. This was a direct, head-on assault that the Mafia, for all its power, was ill-equipped to withstand. The brutal truth of this decline is that the Mafia's greatest strength, its rigid, hierarchical structure and its reliance on omertà also became its ultimate weakness. Once a boss or a powerful capo was taken down, the chain of command was disrupted, and the reliance on absolute secrecy meant that internal information could be devastatingly exploited by law enforcement. The very code of loyalty began to crack under the pressure of long prison sentences and the allure of witness protection. Generations of fear of the mob were replaced by a growing fear of the federal government's relentless pursuit. It's like watching a seemingly invincible fortress slowly crumble, not from a single cannon blast, but from thousands of relentless, targeted strikes that expose its foundational weaknesses. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the traditional American Mafia continued its decline. You observe its diminished presence in its traditional strongholds, while still involved in various illicit activities. Their scale and profitability are significantly reduced compared to their heyday. They face increased competition from other organized criminal groups, both domestic and international, and the evolving nature of cybercrime. Drug trafficking on a global scale often requires different skill sets than their traditional rackets. The legacy of violence remains undeniable and horrifying. Part of the Mafia story, from the brutal street wars of early 20th century New York and Chicago to the chilling assassinations in Las Vegas. Violence was their primary tool for acquiring, maintaining, and enforcing power. You recall the endless turf wars, the public executions, and the terrifying brutality meted out to those who dared to defy them. This ingrained violence, while effective for a time, also painted them as irredeemably monstrous in the public eye, contributing to the societal desire to see them dismantled. However, the Mafia's legacy also extends far beyond their criminal activities into the realm of popular culture. You observe their pervasive presence in books, films, and television shows. Works like the Godfather trilogy, Goodfellas, The Sopranos, and countless others have cemented the image of the Mafia in the global imagination. These portrayals, while often romanticized or exaggerated, delve into themes of family loyalty, honor, betrayal, power, and the dark side of the American dream. They have created a fascination with the underworld that continues to this day, making the Mafia one of the most recognizable and enduring archetypes of organized crime, an intriguing, yet often debated aspect of their cultural legacy is the extent to which these portrayals inadvertently glamorize their violent lifestyle, while showing the ultimate downfall and brutal realities. They also showcased a certain allure of power, wealth, and a twisted sense of family honor that resonated with audiences. Historians and cultural critics still debate whether popular culture accurately reflects or unfairly romanticizes the realities of Mafia life, and how this has impacted public perception and law enforcement efforts over the decades. Despite their cultural prominence, the real-world influence of the traditional American Mafia has significantly diminished. You see their control over labor unions largely broken, their grip on legitimate businesses loosened, and their ability to corrupt high-level politicians severely curtailed. While smaller, fragmented groups and individuals claiming association with the Mafia still exist. They operate in a far more constrained and precarious environment than their predecessors. The darkest secret of the Mafia's modern legacy is perhaps the quiet, almost unceremonious way in which their power has faded. No single dramatic shootout ended their reign. It was a slow, grinding process of attrition, driven by dedicated law enforcement, changing societal norms, and their own inherent inability to adapt to a world where their traditional methods became increasingly unsustainable. The Code of Omerta, once their unassailable shield, ultimately proved permeable when enough men, faced with decades in prison, chose self-preservation over silence. The brutal rise of the Mafia, rooted in a vacuum of authority and enforced by a terrifying code, found its ultimate match in a persistent state willing to learn, adapt, and relentlessly pursue its adversaries. Their story serves as a powerful, chilling reminder of the enduring human fascination with power, the allure of illicit wealth, and the profound, often violent, consequences when a society's shadows become too large to ignore. The days of the untouchable godfathers are gone, but the echo of their brutal legacy continues to ripple through the annals of criminal history. The whispers of the underworld and the clink of illicit coins now softly fade. The smoky backrooms and the neon glow of old Las Vegas casinos dissolving into the quiet hum of the fan. You drift away from the shadows of betrayal and the brutal code of silence, leaving the Mafia to their complex, diminishing legacy. Their rise and fall finally settled into the annals of history. The thrilling, yet often terrifying tale of organized crime concludes, allowing you to settle into the peaceful depths of slumber, All the power, all the violence, all the secrets now melts into the quiet night,